Hey guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. Today's video is a recap of all the dyno tests that were done in 2023 with the small block Chevy. Now I know many of you are like, well, what about the big block Chevy? Because there were a lot of testing was done with the big block Chevy. That's going to be a whole different video because I think this video is going to be insanely long anyway. So you might say, why are you even doing this video? I mean, I already watched them. Well, here's the reason why. Several people throughout the comments would be like, hey, you said this intake was number one. Then someone later, a couple months later, would go, no, this intake's number one. And the reason why is because they only watched, when they watched that video, that intake was number one then. So when things changed. So what I'm saying by that is I'm telling you because, well, it'd be easier if everything was together, and that's the goal for this video. So what I've done is I've combined everything. So instead of someone having to watch 20 videos of all the dyno sessions, you can just watch this video and you'll know what's going on. Now, there's going to be a lot of voiceovers in it just because it's easier to show pictures of the manifold so you know what I'm talking about and the things that were done to it instead of just seeing my face. And yes, I'm doing a face shot because the winter wasn't good to me. Christmas break, man, I ate a ton. You know why people do face shots, of course, because they're, you get the idea. But anyway, to the point, in case you want to know what this engine combination was, it was a small block Chevy. It was a 406. It had a Dart SHP block that I gotten used, and someone had blown it up, so it was half filled with concrete. It has two sleeves in it, but it's good. So everything worked fine with it. It was 904 lifters, had a SCAT 4340 crankshaft, a SCAT rods with ARP 2000 cap screws, Racetech forged pistons, as an Urson saw roller cam, 260, 270 duration, 685 lift, intake and exhaust, and it had 108 lobe separation. I tested 3 different sets of cylinder heads, one of them being the AFR Enforcer heads, which were completely stock with one exception. I changed the springs on them because the springs that come with them for a hydraulic roller, I'm running a solid roller. The next set of heads we tested were the ProMax Project X 215 heads, angle plug. I didn't do anything to those. Besides, I did take them apart just to flow them because both on the AFR Enforcers and on the Project X heads, I flowed all 8 cylinders, make sure there wasn't any outliers to see what was going on. And then the final set of heads that were tested was the ProMax Project X CNC ported heads at 235. It's my port design, so it's the one I came up with for them, and it's for sale by them. But that's the final one. Now, in between doing all this testing, the majority of the testing was with manifolds. And you might say, why did you do so much manifold testing? Well, for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to know if I'd find something because there's so many different manifolds. You would hope you'd find something that gives away why one might be better than the other. And especially, it wasn't just on one set of cylinder heads. On the other set of cylinder heads, tested many manifolds too, because I want to see if maybe one manifold was better with one cylinder head than it was the other. But that was majority, but it was also one of the quicker things to do. But I also tested a lot of other stuff like, does a burr finish actually gain you more power? Does a 60 grip make you more power? Does adding a turtle make more power? Does having smaller push rods versus bigger push rods make more power? What if you do this stupid tube thing that crosses over with all the manifold? Does it make any more power? How about carb spacers? Do they make more power? Does Dominator make more power? What about headers? Do bigger headers make more power? That was all kind of tested. Tunnel rams, do they make more power? Is that true? Are they dogs down low? So a lot of stuff was tested. And the majority of the reason for the testing really came about because so much stuff on the internet was just false. And people kept spreading crap. And I knew it was crap. But the difference was knowing it and proving it are 2 different things. So like when people would comment on stuff, I'd often say, and I still do you have any evidence that backs up what you're saying? And if they say, well, I heard from my buddy, or, I knew when I ran this one car, it did that. So you did the back-to-back comparison. No. Yeah. So I did the dyno stuff. So I would have to say, it's not what I heard. It's what I tested. So anyway, get ready to hear a bunch of voiceovers. We'll start with the manifolds. So here we go. This is the first manifold that was tested. This is the AFR 4811. It made 554 horsepower and 530 foot-pounds of torque. It was pretty good. Can't complain. One of the things that was tested on it, I did remove the clover to see that clover leaf that's there to see if it would do anything as far as power production. It actually lost I think it was 2 horsepower and gained 4 foot-pounds of torque. So not much there. Fully ported one gained all of 512 horsepower and 11 foot-pounds of torque. This was the next manifold that was tested. This is the Brock Super Victor 2925. This one did pretty good out of the box. It made 553 horsepower and 523 foot-pounds of torque. Things were tested on that. Two things were tested. First one, it was the manifold that got tested with a burr finish. The burr finish did actually help the manifold. It jumped it all the way up to 565 horsepower and 537 foot-pounds of torque. And from just doing that, you would have thought it'd be the winner, that burr finishes were the way to go, but I have to test it. So what I did is I tested it with, I took that manifold and then 60 gridded it and dynoed again, and then it jumped it all the way back up to gain some more horsepower to 567 horsepower and 539 foot-pounds of torque. So that was tested on that manifold. This is the next manifold that was tested. This is the Holley 300-110. This is the Keith Thornton version. It made 541 horsepower and 509 foot-pounds of torque. It was kind of a turd, and we never tested it again beyond just the AFR enforcer heads. This was the next manifold tested. This is the Brox BM1000. It was actually really good. It made 561 horsepower and 529 foot-pounds of torque. I should put out, so far, every manifold I've mentioned has been tested with the AFR enforcer heads. This one was really good. It was close to the top. I never got tested again, only because I borrowed this from a customer and had to be sent back. So, really good manifold, though. The next manifold tested was a Trickflow R intake. At the time, it was like brand new coming out. And I have to say, when I first tested it, it was an absolute turd. So we put it on the AFR enforcers first, and it made a whopping 552 horsepower, so it was close to the top, but 520 foot-pounds of torque, so it was down 10 foot-pounds of torque, kind of a turd. Anyway, in a later test, we tested the ProMax Project X 215 heads, and it was tested again, exactly no changes. It made 593 horsepower at that time and 527 foot-pounds of torque. However, many other manifolds beat it, like almost all of the single planes. Almost, not all. However, in Dyno Session 6, when we switched to the CNC ported heads, tested again, this time it made 612 horsepower and 539 foot-pounds of torque. And that's when we saw that the port match was off and milled down the sides of the manifold so that it would sit lower like it should be. In other words, the port match to get correctly. That changed everything. It moved it from damn near the last to one of the best with a 4150, making 615 horsepower and 543 foot-pounds of torque with those ProMax 235cc heads. This was the next manifold. This is the Brock 2892. This one's special in the fact that it's really tall and it's really good. Only with the AFR enforcers, it made 557 horsepower and 523 foot-pounds of torque. So it wasn't that stellar, and that was completely stock form. We tested that again on other heads too, and not in the stock form, but in the ported one, because I had ported one and just did it on the AFR enforcers, and it really didn't gain that much. I don't remember, and I could look back in the results and see, but this is just a recap. It really didn't gain that much. Like, I think it might have gained like 2 horsepower, and I think it even lost some more foot-pounds of torque because it was simply too big. However, once the heads got switched to the ProMax Project X heads, I didn't have that 2892 stock around anymore because it was for customers, and the ported one was also gone. However, another one came in, and this one I had converted to a Dominator flange. So I'd welded out the outside, done a lot of heavy port work on it. And the thing, this manifold, of all the manifolds tested for a, well, actually, of all the manifolds tested, period, when I put a Dominator on it, no manifold beat this one of any of the ones tested in 2023. This was the absolute best peak horsepower manifold that was out there. It actually, I think, close to the peak torque. The tunnel ram might have beat it on torque, maybe. But if not, it was really, really close. But this is the best one with the Dominator. Now, that's not the best one with the 4150, though. This is a very weird manifold. This is the Torqelink Manifold. Now, it's a dual plane, so yeah, I tested a whole bunch of dual planes too, and it was a huge disappointment. It looks like it's going to be fantastic, right? Well, it wasn't. It made 526 horsepower and 504 foot-pounds of torque with the AFR enforcer heads. It was the worst dual plane that I tested. And you'll see later ones that I show, and they're way better. This was just bad. And several people thought that this was going to be the winner, and hell, I did too, because it had such a long runner length. I thought it at least had more torque, but it didn't have more torque. It didn't have more horsepower. It was a turd. This is the AFR Dual Plane Manifold. This was a very interesting one to test. Initially, I tested it. I had used a 4-hole tapered spacer because that's what I'd use on every one of the other combinations. Is a 4-hole tapered spacer from AFR. When I put it on this one, this manifold made 539 horsepower and, well, sorry, I have it wrong, 532 horsepower and 518 foot-pounds of torque. However, upon later testing, I switched it out and put a 1-inch open spacer, and oh my gosh, the thing jumped way up. It went to 540 horsepower and 532 foot-pounds of torque. It was pretty outstanding. Now, here's what's really interesting about this manifold. I didn't have an Brock Performer RPM air gap to ever test. It was one of the ones I never tested. But I did test an Brock Performer RPM, which you'll see in just a minute. This thing was much better than it down low, but at peak power, it was down from the Brock Performer RPM. I mentioned this because when I tested the big block manifolds, it was reversed. The AFR was bad down low and then only matched it at the top. This thing is better at the lower end. And as a matter of fact, this manifold is so good that whenever I had it on the ProMax Project X heads, it made 607 horsepower and 553 foot-pounds of torque with a dual plane. So quite good. This is the Brock Performer RPM. Now, it's not the air gap design. I tested it, and it made 548 horsepower and 524 foot-pounds of torque with the AFR enforcers. One of the things that was tested on this was I cut down the divider on it to see what it would do. It turns out it didn't make more peak power, but it did make more power down low, which was really weird. It should have been the reverse, but that's why I test. Anyway, that was tested. It was overall, if you do the averages, it still had the best average horsepower and torque for the dual planes of any of the ones that was tested. The AFR was still considerably better than it down low. This is where things get crazy. This is a Professional Products Hurricane Manifold. I tested 3 different versions. You're like, what do you mean 3 different versions? There's only one that's out currently. It turns out, see, over the lifespan of the Hurricane, there's been 3 versions of it. Have the same part number. They are dramatically different. So the one that I tested, I tested 3 versions. The first version is from really old ago. If you were able to get it from long ago, that one actually did the best and made 569 horsepower. Then I tested the version 2, which had a thinner runner divider, but it just didn't quite do as good. But it was really, really close to version 1, and it also had a horrible gasket match, but it seemed like it still made quite a bit of power. And version 3 is the one you would get now. It's different, and it's just not as good. One of the things that was also tested, though, on version 3 was I put a turtle in it. So I used some epoxy filled up to floor and made a turtle on that, and it didn't do what I hoped it would do. I was hoping it would give it more down low. All it did was it lost a little bit of horsepower, and it only made a little bit more horsepower and torque through the middle. It didn't pick any peak horsepower, and at the lower RPMs, it didn't gain anything there either. This is the Holley 300-25, the Strip Dominator. Now, this is different than the other Holley I tested. This one everybody thought would be really, really well on this 406, and it just didn't. It only made 547 horsepower and 520 foot-pounds of torque. So if you compare that to like the Super Victor, which is supposed to be its rival, it just wasn't as good. Now, it could be just this combination, but I never tested it again after it, just on the AFR Enforcer heads. It just wasn't that good. It didn't even make the top 3. It was towards the bottom. Now, it wasn't like horrible, but it just wasn't in the top echelon, I should say. This is the BMP or Motown 4150 manifold. This one is near the top. It made 556 horsepower and 532 foot-pounds of torque when it was on the AFR Enforcers. And I only got to test them on that one. But just to give you an idea, if you look at the Super Victor, the 2925, the Broex BM1000, and this manifold, this BMP 4150, they were all within 3 horsepower and about the same foot-pounds of torque. Very good manifold. This is the Broex HV616. Oh, Anyway, this is a dual plane manifold. It's a little bit different than the others because of the way the runners come into the plenum. Most of them enter the other side compared to this one. So it's split, so one enters high and one enters low. This one's reversed. It was the only one that was that way. I kind of thought this thing might be good, but it wasn't that good. It ended up being 537 horsepower and 515 foot-pounds of torque. Most of the other manifolds beat it that were dual planes. However, I will give it the credit to this. It does sit a little bit lower than the rest. So if you're worried about hood clearance, it's not a bad deal. This is the YN Teamg. It was bad. This thing made 549 horsepower and 525 foot-pounds of torque with the AFR enforcers. It was down 5 foot-pounds of torque and almost 15 horsepower compared to like the Super Victor. And the Victor Jr actually destroyed it too. It was kind of a letdown. Anyway, yeah, weird. This was your #1 manifold for a 4150 for a long time. This is an old, not new, but old Brock Victor Jr manifold. Now, this had been port matched to a 1206. A viewer sent it in. I thought it was going to be a piece of crap. It turns out to be the better one. On the AFR Enforcers, it made like 570-something horsepower. It made more torque, and I'm not just talking peaks. It made it everywhere. So it had beaten the Hurricanes. It was the best. It was the best 4150 until the Trickflow R got milled down, and now that one actually beats it with the 4150 1000 CFM carburetor. That's the only one right now that's beating it. The Victor Jr., this old one is it. And I think it has more to do with the port match, and if you watch my other previous videos, you know what I'm talking about. This is a new Victor Jr., so this is how they look new. This one I actually tested, so I did test this one. It turns out not having the port match didn't help it. I thought, well, shoot, they should be, this new one should be better, because if you look at it, it's more rounded in the corners. It looks better. It should be better. Now, by the way, when you looked at that old Victor Jr., you saw how it's rounded on the dividers. I did that, tested it both ways before and after. That was worth 2 horsepower. So I really thought, well, this new one's going to be the ticket. And it didn't. So I believe the port match was more important than the actual smoothness of the manifold. This is the Brock 2970. This is a Super Victor, but it's for a Dominator. So this one only went on whenever we put it on the Project X 215 heads. So this thing was outstanding. With the cloverleaf in it and everything, it made about 620 horsepower. I think it made like 622 or 23 horsepower and about 548 foot-pounds of torque. But yeah, the thing was really, really good. Now, I did remove the cloverleaf that you see there because that was one of the things I wanted to test. So we tested it with the AFR, which was a 4150, and then we tested it again with this the Dominator one like this, and it didn't do much. The curves were virtually identical. I mean, 1 or 2 horsepower here and there, that's it. So it wasn't a huge difference anyway. But the manifold, if you look at it, the only one that's beat it in as far as peak power, because I told you the #1 right now coming in on the 4150 is a Trickflow R, followed by the Brock Victor Jr. Those two are the best with the 4150. With a Dominator, that heavily modified Super Victor 2892 or the Super Victor 2 that's been super ported and modified to do a Dominator, that one's the best. Right after that, it's this, and it's really close to it. And that's just with the cloverleaf removed. I haven't even fully ported it yet, so that's a good one. This is the Brock Performer EPS dual plane manifold. It actually did really well. It held its own. It made like 530 horsepower. I can't remember exact numbers. I know I should be looking this up, but I'm getting tired of recording. But anyway, it did fairly well. Nothing to be ashamed of. It held right with the Brock Performer RPM manifold. It was really close. It still wasn't as good as the AFR down low. You would think because of the smaller runners, it would have been better at the lower RPMs, but it wasn't. It also wasn't as good at the peak power-wise either. So it was closer to those. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the Broex. Like that. Matter of fact, this one actually beat that Broex manifold. And then this one also destroyed the Torqelink as well. This was probably my favorite manifold to test. This is an Brock Street Ram. It's a tunnel ram. And it was cool because, people were like, tunnel rams, they don't make any torque down low. Oh my goodness, no. This thing destroyed everything. I'm talking Dominator, 4150, I don't care. This was the best at low RPM. What about the dual planes? No, it destroyed the dual planes. This thing was up everywhere over the dual planes. So it wasn't just one spot, it was everywhere. Now, here's the thing. It made 10 foot-pounds more torque than any of the other manifolds, period. However, it didn't make the same peak power because it's kind of a small one. So it only made, this was with the Project X had stock, it made 614 horsepower and 558 foot-pounds of torque. And one of the runs, it made 570 foot-pounds of torque. So it's a little strong. This next manifold is the Hulk 23 by Chris Uratko. This manifold was totally not designed for what we were using it for, and it kind of showed in the power production. It only made 605 horsepower and 522 foot-pounds of torque, so it's just too big for what this engine combination is. Nice looking manifold. We'll probably revisit it when the engine starts spinning up more RPM, hopefully. But yeah, for this combination, it wasn't a winner. Now, I should point out too, this is version 1. I know he has a version 2 out that's got a little bit longer runner, and it's probably going to be better. But this is version 1. Okay, so it's late. I don't even know if we made it through that part. So it's like 11:15. I gotta get up at 4:30. So anyway, here's what I'm gonna do. I suck at videos anyway, and I don't even know how far people make it in videos. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start taking pictures of the pages here in my books. By the way, any of the stuff you see, you can purchase the books. So let me show you. There's these books that are out right now. Well, this one's available for a PDF. You can get the PDF versions of these. This one somewhere over here. I think it's this one here. Yep, this one right here. This one actually is available now. So you can actually purchase this, but you can get all the results in there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a picture of all these graphs, and I'm gonna put them all together, and that'll be the end of your video. Don't have me talking. You could just kind of see. And I'm sorry, you're like, man, you should put out more effort. Man, it's like 11:30, and I've been trying to work on this all week. That's why I haven't even put out any videos. But at least then you have it all in one. So sorry, I'm tired. And yeah, so anyway, later videos will be better, but it's really hard to make this. This thing needs to be like an hour long, to be quite honest with you. And I don't even have an hour. So, but anyway, I'm going to start taking pictures like comparisons and just put them together. Sorry this video may not be what you wanted. I feel like I just played a game of Monopoly. You want to win, but man, you're like, at the end, you're like, I'm tired of doing this. Oh, but anyway, all that stuff's there. If you want more of the details, just purchase the PDF bundle. Go to my website, wengines.com. There's a link to my online store. You can purchase that bundle. It's $100. You'll get everything except for the last book. The last book you're going to have to buy separately. So I'm getting ready to put that on an online store now for that PDF copy. If you're a member, it's $20. If you're a channel member, so in other words, you've paid your money for that, then you get that. You could pay $20 and have the PDF. If you're not a channel member, it's $50 for that last one. So $100 for every book except for the last one. And that would have had everything, so you ain't got to look at this and wonder what I'm doing. But at least now I got some information. I'm going to do the big block one, but I'm going to do it. I'm not going to try to do it in one evening because that's just a disaster. I've learned my lesson from this one. So the next one, when I do the 2023 recap of the big block engine, much better. I'll put it together better. I don't know when it'll be out. Sorry, this video sucked. I want to get it out to you. I thought it was going to be great. Yeah, you get it. Or no, you don't get it, and you're still pissed at me. I get it too. Anyway, guys, remember, I'm no Superman. I don't pour cast iron heads. Sincerely, thanks for watching. You guys take care.